Ladies and gentlemen, I can call you to order. Thank you. A very warm welcome this evening as we begin our celebrations this weekend of the 100th anniversary since the Temple Newsam house and estate was acquired by the City of Leeds. It's a particular delight to welcome Lord Halifax here this evening. His grandfather was the last person to hold the estate in private ownership, so it's lovely that he is with us, able to share in this talk this evening. So it's good to have you here. It's a great thing, Temple Newsam, isn't it? Yeah. We'd all say that. It's a great thing for our city. And we are, at St Mary's here in Whitkirk, particularly proud of that connection between the house and our church and the history that reaches back, of course, beyond 1922, as we discovered last year, if you can remember back to the talk that we had then. So we look forward to hearing from Dorothy shortly. I'll introduce her in a moment or two. Just a few practical things. In the unlikely event of a fire, run! In the unlikely event of a fire, you'll see there are clear fire exits, one there, one at the back, one at the side. Look at the green signs and, yes, carefully make your way out. Many of you, I'm delighted to see, have enjoyed some refreshments. I think there might be still one or two left at the end. We've been delighted to lay this on for you free of charge, but should you wish to make any donations, there's a pot you can put some pennies in on the way out, should you wish to. After the talk, the bar will stay open for a time, so you can continue the conversation and continue to enjoy the evening after the talk's finished. Toilets are at the back there, and I'm sure I don't need to remind you about mobile phones. They're all going now, so you can turn them off, all that sort of thing. Some of you have already signed up at the back there. What we hope to do in due course is to produce a booklet based on the talk which Dorothy is giving this evening, which we hope will be illustrated. If you'd like to sign up and express interest in having a copy of that, it will come at a cost, I'm afraid. There's a sheet for you to sign with names and email addresses, and if you don't do email, you can just write your postal address and we'll be in touch in due course. And also, just to say that I'm using that list also to be in touch with you next year, when hopefully we have the 3rd annual Whitkirk lecture, and invite you to that when that time comes around then. So you're signing up for kind of both of those things at once. Getting there, promise. Just on Sunday, at 10 o'clock at Temple Newsam House, is our annual Eucharist, which we hold there. It will be in the long gallery with the potential for an overflow. Oh my gosh. An overflow. Oh, there you are. Overflow to the Great Hall, if needs be. That was one of the, what's the word, sort of clauses or deeds that were put in the agreement between the city and the church. Let there be light. No, it's gone. Darkness and light. And that's what we're celebrating on Sunday at 10 o'clock. And you're very welcome to join us, should you wish to. I know some of you already are, who are here with us this evening. Now, let me just check my list. I'm getting there. So lastly, I think Dorothy's going to talk now. I'll introduce Dorothy Schofield to us. Dorothy's had many of you will know Dorothy. Yes. She's got a long history with Whitkirk. She's got a wonderful passion for this area and for local history. And I can say, over the last year, since I encouraged her to offer this lecture tonight, she's done wonderful work exploring all sorts of different streams. And there have been so many of them, which will probably tell you, it's been quite hard to focus in, because there's so much interest that was happening then. So, Dorothy, really, thank you for all the work you've done so far. The talk will last about 45 to 50 minutes. And then there'll be a chance for some questions and some maybe observations or other things. And as I said, the bar will be open. So, without any further ado, Dorothy Schofield, let's give her a warm welcome.
Good evening, everybody. I just want to start with what people usually leave until the end, and I want to start with my thanks to very many people who have generously assisted with their knowledge and their time during my preparation and research for this lecture. As Matthew, the vicar, has said, I have, over a period of months, amassed what seems to be an ever-growing quantity of photographs, papers, and many newspaper reports. And they're fascinating records of this particular event, Temple Newsam, 1922, the house, the city, and the church. I want to start first of all and invite you to picture a scene. Tuesday, the 19th of September, 1922. An autumn afternoon. The harvesters in the fields gathering grain. Fit hours and fit setting for this ceremony at Temple Newsam. Today, the old glorious mansion, the shrine of centuries, becomes the possession of the city. Leeds, the harvester. That is how I pictured the scene. Leeds gathering into its granaries the golden sheaves of history. A very lyrical account from a newspaper at the time by a national political journalist actually, called Sidney Walton. And the image of the harvest is, I think, quite a fitting one for this time of year. So his phrase, the old glorious mansion, the shrine of centuries. Centuries which saw the Knights Templar, Lord Darcy, the builder of the magnificent Tudor house, beheaded for his part in the Pilgrimage of Grace, the birthplace of Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, husband of Mary, Queen of Scots, and father of the future King James VI of Scotland, King James I of England. 1622, Sir Arthur Ingram, the purchaser of the house, and reworking the earlier house into a splendid Jacobean mansion, worthy of his status as financier, money raiser of King James I, owner of land and estates across Yorkshire. Many epithets attached to Sir Arthur, some less than complimentary, such as celebrated for his financial skill and ruthless self-interest. His memorial in Whitkirk Church is one of many to family members, marking a close association of the church with Temple Newsam. Ingrams, Irwins, Viscounts, Earls lived there and are commemorated in Whitkirk Church. In the later 19th century, the influential chatelaine Emily Meynell Ingram did so much to preserve the history and romance of the house. Leeds, the city, a town growing larger, inventing and manufacturing more and more throughout the Industrial Revolution. It became a city in 1893, with a Lord Mayor by 1897. The church, this ancient holy site since the 11th century, and possibly earlier. A landmark in the area with the shining point of the tower spire clearly visible for miles around. So it is 100 years since Temple Newsam came into the possession of the City of Leeds. But 50 years ago, in 1972, there was a half-century celebration of the acquisition. The City Council organised a special event. Perhaps some people here remember it. This is my programme from the time, so I obviously was there, but I'm not sure what I remember about it. So it was called the East Blows Home. June to September nightly, a covered shelter on the east side of the house, looking into the courtyard. The lights went on, coloured round the fountain, the sound of a crumhorn was heard, and the voices of Sir Michael Redgrave, Cyril Fletcher and others began. We passed through some 800 years of history as it touched this place and this district. The end of the Knights Templar, touching on the Pilgrimage of Grace, Lord Darcy, Lord Darnley, the Ingrams and the Irwins. There was incidental music played on medieval, Renaissance and Baroque instruments, and atmospheric sound effects, sounds of ghosts. One quick gruesome murder and the dragging of the body of Phoebe Gray round the house and then dropped into a well. The curse of a deprived woman rends the night air. A wing catches fire and we hear its engulfing crackle. Effective lighting shone from the inside of various rooms or halls, and lights swept across all or part of the outside as episodes unfolded. Newspaper report of the time. Unfortunately, the Sonny Lumiere was not a financial success. Mr. Robert Rowe, director of Leeds Art Galleries at the time, reported, "The appalling weather appears to have played a decisive part in reducing attendances." Alderman Mrs. Malcolm, Libraries and Arts Committee chairman, said that she was upset that the production had failed, but she was against it from the start. "Not enough people want to see something like this," she said. I think she was wrong. The official handing over of the house and over 900 acres to the Corporation of Leeds took place on the 19th of September 1922, an event marked with a service and with a luncheon to follow. One newspaper described it as a day of history, romance and sentiment interwoven for the leaders of the public life of Leeds. A day of history, but a history that is really about people. I'll introduce a few. Lady Emily Charlotte Wood in 1863 married Hugo Francis Maynell Ingram, whose family had lived at Temple Newsam since the reign of James I. After only a few years happily married, she was widowed in 1871. She made many additions and alterations to the house and was a generous benefactor to causes in the locality. As she had no children to succeed her, on her death in 1904, her nephew, Edward Wood, the son of the second Viscount Halifax, inherited Temple Newsam. Edward Frederick Lindley Wood was born on the 16th of April 1881, the son of Charles Wood, the second Viscount Halifax, and the brother of Mrs. Maynell Ingram. He graduated from Oxford in 1899 with a first-class degree in modern history. He was elected Conservative MP for Ripon in January 1910. He saw active service during the First World War, and at the end of 1917, he returned to take up a post in the Ministry of National Service. His father, the second Viscount Halifax, was president of the English Church Union, which sought ecumenical reunion of the Roman Catholic Church with the Church of England. Edward Wood maintained his own dedication to the Anglo-Catholic tradition. His deep, firm Christian faith was central to his life. Major Wood, as he was sometimes known, had a prominent political career, becoming Viceroy of India and Foreign Secretary. In 1944, he was created the first Earl of Halifax. His career after the time of this lecture is the subject for others. I do like this next slide. That's, as you may imagine, that's Mr. Edward Wood, and with him, on approval, is his future wife, Lady Dorothy. A lovely caption, I think, on that photograph. They married on 21st of September 1909. Their return from honeymoon in October was greeted with great enthusiasm and festivities. Coming from a visit to Edward Wood's sister and brother-in-law, Mary and George Lane Fox at Bramham Park, they then proceeded to Temple Newsam via York Road, Victoria Park, which is East End Park, Neville Hill, and the Red Road to Halton. Triumphal arches were erected at all entry points to the estate, and even in Halton Village. This one's Halton Village at the just near Pinfold Lane there. And in spite of the rain, the couple was given a great welcome, even at Newsam Green, and a triumphal arch was put up there. Houses were decorated, hundreds cheered as they passed through Halton and Whitkirk, with children waving flags outside the school. And, another newspaper report, as they approached Whitkirk, the bells of the ancient church rang a merry welcome, and they were accompanied by a great crowd to the entrance of the park, where a band was waiting to play them into the hall. This was an opportunity to celebrate and to share with all involved at Temple Newsam, especially the tenants and employees of the estate. Excuse me, one moment. The banqueting tent, Wednesday the 13th of October 1909. 550 guests from the estates at Temple Newsam, Altofts, Normanton, Heath near Wakefield, Sheriff Hutton, Barton-le-Street and Halifax. Just picture this scene, but with the tent full of people. Brass or silver bands playing, and chance to view the wedding presents arrayed in the hall. Tea was served in the marquee, and at 6 o'clock guests gathered at the clock court to say goodbye to their host and hostess. Thursday the 14th of October, 600 of the cottage tenants were similarly entertained for the afternoon. Presentations were made, music was played by the Alton and Altofts bands. I mention these celebrations because I think it shows something of the relationship between owner and estate workers, and not just because many depended on their jobs on the estate for their livelihood and indeed for their homes. It is worth listening to one particular voice at the celebrations, that of Mr. John Farrer, agent to the Temple Newsam estate over many years. This speech is to the group comprising the guests from the various estates. We should hear a particular note, one of community. Anyone who reads the newspapers might feel rather surprised to come here and see landlord and tenantry sitting down in the same tent. Laughter and applause. If we believe all we see in print, the landlord is the enemy of the human race. Laughter. And only 1 degree less bad than the Duke. Loud laughter. I wish some of those who make such speeches were able to be here and learn the extremely simple truth that at the bottom, the landowner and farmer know that their interest is common, that the interest of the landlord is the interest of the tenants, and that the interest of the tenants is the interest of the landlord. Applause. There is, however, more than that between them. I hope the bond is not only one of community of interest, but the more lasting one of real affection and real friendship. Friendship which enables them to regard each other as members of one family who would share each other's sorrows if need be and share each other's happiness and pleasures. Applause. Mr. Edward Wood endorsed those comments in his reply. We all have common interests. The interest of one is the interest of all. We do not live in compartments shut off from one another. We have to live our lives together, to help one another, to care for one another. These statements, I think, show really close connection and genuine affection. Lady Dorothy took up her responsibilities as the lady of the house, visiting tenants and carrying out functions at local events. Such events were noted in her diary, attending the allotments show at Crossgates, no doubt to award prizes, and giving away prizes at Leeds Hospital. Lady Dorothy took on the duties of Commandant and Quartermaster when the south wing of the mansion became a voluntary aid detachment hospital during the First World War. She has been described as possessing charm, friendliness, sympathy and kindness, and invaluable support to her husband. Excuse me, this probably might work. It doesn't have to go away. So the next person in my introduction of these people is the person representing the city, Leeds, the Harvester. Charles Henry Wilson was elected Conservative Councillor for Leeds North Ward in 1890. He was made an alderman in 1907 and he became council leader, a position he held for 20 years. During the First World War, he took an active part in the formation of the Leeds Pals, the 15th Battalion of the Prince of Wales' own West Yorkshire Regiment. He was knighted in 1923 for public and political services in Leeds, and he was made a freeman of the city. He became MP for Leeds Central in 1923 until 1929. He then returned to Leeds City Council as leader of the Conservative group until September 1930, when he stepped down for health reasons. He died 2 months later at Osgoodby Hall near Selby on the 30th of December 1930. By all accounts, he was a remarkable man. It was his sheer force of personality and skill in political manoeuvring that enabled him to control the council. He was highly ambitious for Leeds and hoped the city would one day control a unitary authority which extended over the vast area from the Pennines to the sea. His policy led to Leeds' acquisition of many outer areas, including Crossgates and Seacroft areas in 1911, Middleton in 1919, and Temple Newsam, or Woodley, Echo and Orsthorpe in 1928. Charles Wilson would have been very closely involved with Edward Wood in the negotiations for the purchase of Temple Newsam. He was also the chairman of the Finance Committee his own Chancellor of the Exchequer, as he put it. The undisputed governor of the city's affairs, he will be forever known for the classic phrase, "I am Leeds." Some say he was boasting. He said, "There is nothing foolish about me saying I am Leeds because I claim to represent Leeds, the spirit of Leeds, and that will not be beaten by anything or anybody." His personality was no less impressive than his political achievements. This 20-stone giant of a man, with a countryman's robustness of body and spirit, has a great voice, a cheery smile, and exercises a power that no one can resist. Those were the words of one of his friends, Colonel George Lane Fox, MP for Barkston Ash. Charles Wilson was a dedicated Anglican, a teetotaler, a regular churchgoer who was happy to hold Bible classes in his front room. One episode is recounted in an article in the Thorsby Society publications of an episode that, an incident that happened in just after the First World War. A party of 9 councillors and others went to France to present Marshal Foch with the freedom of the City of Leeds. The group joined a wedding celebration in their hotel. Wilson emerged naked from the bathroom and challenged the world to a wrestling match. A brawny French mare, similarly unattired, took up the challenge. The bout was a fine one until a maid broke it up. His obituary in the Times in 1930 said that he was a man of strong and genial personality. He served the city with entire devotion. Another figure directly involved in the ceremonies of the 19th of September was Willie Hodgson, the Lord Mayor. He was born in Ockley in 1872. He was Liberal Councillor for North West Ward, Chairman of Highways and of the Markets Committee, and in 1921, at the age of 49, he was one of the youngest councillors to be announced as Lord Mayor. He was anything but a silent member and is described as a breezy personality. I'm not quite sure what that newspaper reporter was getting at there, but obviously a cheerful soul. He had also been in the delegation to Paris to confer the freedom of the City of Leeds on Marshal Foch, but we have no reports of him engaging in the naked wrestling. He was apparently, though, a nephew by marriage of the Conservative leader, Alderman Charles Wilson, a fact which should, as someone said, it should add gaiety to the council meetings. So he was a Liberal, Alderman Wilson was a Conservative. Willie Hodgson was Lord Mayor of Leeds in 1922, and he was present at the ceremony. But sadly, his life was cut short soon after his term of office ended. He died in March 1923, aged only 50 years old, and he was killed instantly in a motor accident at Dawson's Corner in the Stanley area. The third part of my title, the church, is represented by Canon John Wilde, who led the service. He was 81 years old, the long-serving priest at St Saviour's Church, Richmond Hill, and the chaplain and great friend to Mrs Maynell Ingham, and then to Lord Halifax. Canon Wilde enjoyed several yachting excursions with Mrs Maynell Ingham on her yacht, the Ariadne. On one cruise to the Baltic and Holland, he was dismayed to see Calvinist churches and their practices. Canon Wilde reported his experiences in the St Saviour's Monthly Church magazine. Here's an extract from 1888, actually. For the first week in Holland, we had mostly cold, dull, rainy weather, but this week has been perfect summer weather, very sultry ashore, but with a pleasant breeze on board ship. You have no doubt often heard how scrupulously clean the Dutch are. They are forever scrubbing and cleaning and washing and painting, and every house is a picture of neatness and cleanliness. I'm afraid if they could be transported into Leeds, the dirt and smoke would drive them out of their senses. I'm not sure what some of his congregation might have made of these accounts of his journeys to exotic foreign places. He was appointed to St Saviour's by Dr Edward Bulwer-Pusey, who founded the church, which was then experiencing a stormy period of its history. It was a church in the Anglo-Catholic tradition, and some of its earlier incumbents had become Roman Catholics. At one point, the trouble was threatened by a mob of Kensingtonites who organised demonstrations against popery and ritualism. From Canon Wilde's obituary, this is a report of one particular episode for him. In the most turbulent period at St Saviour's, Canon Wilde had a bodyguard of York Road miners. Well, there were a lot of miners in the York Road area and in East Leeds. Now, the miners were not much given to church attendance, but they valiantly lent their protection at the church door and threatened dire penalties upon anyone who dared molest our vicar. Canon Wilde lived to the age of 100. He kept in touch with Edward Wood and the family throughout his long life. He is described in newspaper obituaries and reports as a man of singular charm of character. He devoted himself to the welfare of the people of the district and carried on his work, often without the help of an assistant priest, until he was 88. The vicar of Whitkirk, Ernest William Wilson, vicar at the time of the service in 1922, was not present, was not mentioned on the service sheet, nor in any of the written reports, and it is probable that he was unwell, as he retired early the following year. Canon Wilde was an obvious choice, therefore, to officiate as a long-standing close friend and chaplain to the family. Whitkirk was not omitted from the proceedings, however. Lord Halifax, the father of Edward Wood, in his speech after the meal, expressed the hope that under the arrangements made with the corporation and by the kindness of the vicars of Whitkirk and the vicar of Leeds, the service of the church may be celebrated in the chapel at least on one day in every year in order to mark God's blessing and the gift of his peace on all. The stipulation in the covenant agreement was obviously important to the family. So house, city and church. We've met some of the people, and it's proved difficult in this short time to give more than a snapshot of their personal qualities. But I must move on now to 1922 and the events then. The early years of the 20th century, and especially the years following the First World War, saw a world changed entirely. A newspaper report deals with the difficulties faced by our country houses. Hardly a day passes that some great landed estate that has been in a family for generations is announced for sale, often because the owner is unable to keep it up. I'm going backwards for some reason, I'm sorry. The houses. The causes are well known. Death duties, the burden of taxation and maintenance are insupportable. The threat of nationalisation. Farmers, whether owners or tenants, have experienced 2 years of rapidly falling prices, and it is feared that the slump has not yet been fully felt. The farmers' ratings burdens are also more than he can bear. Just how difficult finances were is shown in an exchange of letters between the vicar of St Mary's, Whitkirk, and Mr Edward Wood. Earlier in 1922, the vicar, the Reverend Ernest Wilson, had written to Mr Wood. He was seeking his opinion of the architect's report detailing necessary repairs and restoration which the church building needed. Mr Wood apologised for not replying earlier, but to tell the truth, I've hardly known what to say. If the capacity of others is to be measured by my own, the task of raising over £1,000 for a comprehensive scheme of restoration at this moment is fairly hopeless. So the task of raising even £1,000 for a comprehensive scheme of restoration is fairly hopeless. Money was not easy to procure. And so the prospect of having to sell Temple Newsam became a reality in 1922. The council minutes of the 7th of December 1921 record the following: that the council accept the offer of the Hon. EFL Wood to sell to the corporation 913 acres or thereabouts of land at Temple Newsam, together with the mansion and adjacent buildings, for the sum of £35,000. and to accept the gift of such pictures, works of art and other things on such condition as may be arranged. £35,000 is referred to in several accounts as being a very generous agreement that the city benefited from more than Mr. Wood. A large sale of many, but not all, the contents of the mansion took place over 7 days, from Wednesday the 26th of July to Wednesday the 2nd of August. Over 1,450 lots were auctioned, and the catalogue ran to 60 pages. Visitors to the sale included a young married couple, possibly looking to furnish their new home. This couple was Viscount Lascelles and Princess Mary, and their new home, Goldsborough Hall. The sale attracted significant numbers, 200 on one of the days, and spirited bidding was reported. The auctioneer moved from room to room and took most of the crowd with him. Business was what the people had come for, and they attended to it without regard to what the distinguished visitors might do. The result was that Princess Mary, her husband, and her mother-in-law, the Countess of Harewood, were able to move about and inspect the goods on offer without very much, if any, interference. They walked around the corridors, followed by one very self-conscious and uncomfortable West Riding constable, and looked into many rooms just as would any ordinary prospective bidder. After their inspection of the rooms, the party from Harewood had tea in the south wing and left soon after 4 o'clock in a quite informal manner. By day 7, the auction arrived at the kitchen and laundry effects, over 250 lots on that day alone. Today, we might struggle to identify some items and also to envisage the quantities for sale. A jelly bath stand, 3 rolls of drugget, 18 flat irons, and a Eureka stove. This must have been state-of-the-art at the time. It is, though, a rather sad procession of items, leaving a house, a home, a workplace, and a treasure house of history. The estate account books show payments had to be made for policing the event. £48 went to the West Riding Constabulary, provision of food from Collinson's, a posh restaurant in Leeds, £8, 14 shillings and 6 Beer was supplied to the police during the sale at a cost of 2 guineas. The sale was completed on Wednesday the 2nd of August. There were, however, paintings, furniture and other items which were transferred with the house, and over the years, Lord Halifax and his family have loaned or given other pieces with particular association to the house. On then to the 19th of September 1922 and the official handing over, reported in several newspapers at the time. These reports cover the contents of the service, the sermon and the speeches following, almost word for word, when comparing that with archived documents. Journalists in 1922 were obviously well acquainted with shorthand. One newspaper report described the event as a day of history, romance and sentiment interwoven for the leaders of the public life in Leeds. The service was arranged to take place in the chapel and gallery at 12:45, followed by luncheon in the house at 1:30. Invitation picture is, of course, the well-known picture of the house and Sir Arthur Ingram's inscription around the balustrade at the top. Yorkshire Post, reporting the event the following day, we must picture yet another scene. The transfer of the estate yesterday was made the occasion of a gathering at Temple Newsam, when Major Wood and Lady Dorothy Wood entertained the members of the City Council and the principal officials of the corporation, together with their ladies, to luncheon in the banqueting hall. The guests, numbering over 150, assembled first at the town hall. There was a brief council meeting, and then the members and their ladies drove to Temple Newsam in private cars and charabancs, making a considerable procession through the city. The guests were received in the grand gallery by Major Wood and Lady Dorothy, and then passed through to the little chapel at the end of the gallery, where divine service was held. This was one of the most touching events in a day that was afterwards frequently spoken of as memorable and epoch-making. The chapel, which was restored in her day by the late Mrs. Mabel Ingram, on the site upon which the original chapel is supposed to have stood, has probably never before held so crowded a congregation. It was quite incapable of holding all who would like to have participated in so unique a service, and some who were unable to find seats were content to remain and stand. I returned to the newspaper journalist from the beginning of my talk, Sidney Watson, with another lyrical piece, and it is really something that you could almost close your eyes and imagine the scene. He was present and he was looking on at events. The sun shines through the autumn mists, a sound of organ music. At the ancient doorway stands the Lord Mayor and Alderman of the city. The regalia brings a vivid touch of colour to the scene. The processional is ready to move through the corridors to the chapel, a small, hidden inner temple at the end of a spacious and lightsome room. The altar candles spread a dim religious light within. The congregation overflows into the outer temple. I sit at an oriel window, looking now upon the assembling worshippers, now upon the fair and pleasant demesne of field and wood into which the city has entered. The service lasted half an hour, and Canon Wild was assisted by his own organist, Miss Jessie Johnson, and members of the choir from St Saviour's. The Vicar of Leeds, the Reverend Bernard Haywood, gave a highly imaginative picture of the history of the old Temple Newsam, which stood here before the great house was built, a cavalry depot from whence these crusaders, their white mantles marked with a red cross, valiant and virtuous, fared forth to serve God. He went on to emphasise the sacredness in the Christian view of the task of government and the increasing responsibility of municipal governors. He declared that the rulers of Leeds assumed a great responsibility in accepting the charge of Temple Newsam and prayed for a wisdom and spirit worthy of the trust. The prayers reminded of the Christian ideals of the Knights Templar: service, defence of the helpless, and the true welfare of the people. And the prayers are for these values to continue with the new keepers. There's a copy of the service sheet over there if you've not had a chance to look just yet. After the sermon, the service continued with the hymn, O God, our help in ages past, and the final prayer of blessing. The guests then repaired to the banqueting hall, and luncheon was served. And what a feast that was. Again, there's a picture over there. I really would like to know what the cure jellies were, but that's another story. But a feast indeed, and more than 150 guests sitting down in the hall to eat it. The seating plan: at the top table, the Honourable Edward Wood, MP, and his wife, Lady Dorothy, his father, Viscount Halifax, the Lord Mayor, W. Hodgson, JP, and Lady Mayoress, Mrs. Hodgson, Alderman Charles Wilson, and Mrs. Wilson, the Vicar of Leeds, and other members of the Halifax family. The majority of guests were Leeds Corporation aldermen, councillors, and their wives. The town clerk, Sir Robert Fox, the city engineer, W.T. Lancashire, and the medical officer of health, Dr. Jervis, were all seated. Other holders of public office included the waterworks engineer, chief constable, the tramways general manager, and members of the press. The speeches were the King, a loyal toast to the King, a speech to the City of Leeds, and Temple Newsam. Loud cheers greeted Major Wood as he got to his feet to propose the toast of the City of Leeds. He said the decision to make the offer that had been made to the corporation was not reached light-heartedly or without extreme reluctance. His speech is open in explaining his reasons. The burden of taxation had become so severe that it was increasingly difficult for him to maintain Temple Newsam as it deserved and had been maintained hitherto. He was also certain that even if he had carried on with the estate in his lifetime, it was morally certain that the taxation on his death would have made the task impossible for his successor. He mentioned his aunt, the late Mrs. Maynell Ingram, who had also felt that if at any time change there had to be, there was one party to whom, in virtue of many claims, the first offer of Temple Newsam ought rightly to be made, and that was to Leeds. And his speech continues: and I take this opportunity of thanking the representatives of the City of Leeds for the manner in which they have been willing to join hands with me in endeavouring to perpetuate the romantic interest that gathers round a house which has silently assisted at the making of over 3 centuries of English history. Edward Wood's speech touches upon the life of the City of Leeds in the 1920s. That city, with its large and concentrated population and highly organised industrial existence, has to face problems that are at once grave, difficult and insistent, and that in their solution will call for all the assistance that local patriotism can evoke. I like to think that thanks to the wise and long vision of those who are responsible for the city's fortunes, with whom in this matter it's been my duty to confer, it will still be within the power of Temple Newsam to continue to make its own peculiar contribution to the human lives that fall within its range of influence, and through them to the communal life of your society. The strong sense of history is certainly a major reference in all the speeches. The traditional connection of past owners with the Knights Templars is spoken of as a matter of great pride. The relations between Temple Newsam and Leeds have in the past been intimate, he continued, and he speaks of great satisfaction at the role that Temple Newsam played during the war as a voluntary aid hospital. I am glad, therefore, that the last persons whom I should have been enabled to welcome to Temple Newsam should have been the representatives of the City of Leeds, and I can only conclude by expressing the hope that our proceedings today may be the means of fostering that spirit of friendly fellowship which the inscription on the house expresses as loving affection amongst the subjects of the king, and which itself is the acknowledgement in an everyday working world of those ultimate laws by which man's destiny is ordered and controlled. Cries of "hear, hear," applause and loud cheers punctuated the speech. The Lord Mayor, Mr. Willie Hodgson, responded by expressing to Mr. Wood the city's grateful and sincere thanks for his cordial wishes. The day was one of great importance in their civic history. With the beginning of its new career, Temple Newsam would not only give pleasure and enjoyment to the citizens of Leeds, but would be the greatest showplace in the north of England. We feel justifiable pride and gratitude, continued the Lord Mayor, that such a magnificent estate should become our property. The Lord Mayor said that the very name of Temple Newsam took them back to the time of chivalry, to the time when nobles of our country devoted their lives and fortunes to the object of the Crusades. In conclusion, the Lord Mayor humorously referred to the times when the Knights Templars were suppressed and their furniture was disposed of for 4 shillings. I don't know where he got that from. Alderman Wilson was the next speaker, proposing the toast to Temple Newsam. In his speech, he confessed himself one of 3 Knights Templar present, and was proud to serve under that banner, so that his feelings on the present occasion were indeed difficult to describe. He did pick up on one suggestion that the Vicar of Leeds had made in his sermon, that the house could become a shelter for the deserving aged fallen on evil times. In answer to the Vicar, Alderman Wilson said in his speech that he would never agree to the bringing of pensioners into the mansion. Pretty forthright, really. Yeah. One of the most interesting figures present was that of the host's father, Viscount Halifax, who, despite his more than 80 years, bore a share in the subsequent wealth of speech-making, dwelling with delightful freshness and enthusiasm on the historical associations of the old mansion and his own personal memories connected with the place. I've seen the manuscript of Viscount Halifax's speech on the occasion. It runs to quite a few pages, but it's very interesting to work your way through and to decipher some of the handwriting. Here's a snippet from it. Here is a snippet from there we go. It is now more than 70 years ago since I first knew anything of Temple Newsam. The old gardener at Hickleton in my grandfather's time and later had been gardener at Temple Newsam, and I can recall now the terror he used to inspire us as children when he caught us trying to take the peaches and other fruit off the garden walls. Walls which in those days were heated by fires and flues at the back. A custom now abandoned, but then common in Yorkshire and the north of England. I remember now how struck I was with the place and by the interest attaching to the house. There were in those days beautiful beech avenues, one in particular with 5 other avenues diverging from it at the bottom of the park. And there was also a fine avenue of sycamores on the way past the house to Leeds. Smoke and coal workings have destroyed the avenues and killed many of the trees, but it is well that the memories of them should be preserved, and it is pleasant to remember that though the trees are gone, the house remains in much the same state as it was, although it has been improved in many material respects. Lord Halifax was a keen collector of ghost stories, and he published 2 volumes of ghost stories himself. In his speech, he does mention at length noises, knocks and screams, all unexplained. When sleeping in the Blue Room, his sister had heard steps across the room going down the passage to the hall. He himself, when sleeping in the same room, saw a woman with a blue shawl over her head pass behind the dressing table, past the bed, and from one side of the room to the opposite door. But whether I really did see anything, or that it was only a dream between sleeping and waking, I shall not try to determine. Edward Wood's father, Lord Halifax, may have had nearly the last word in the speeches. And this is one phrase that I find is particularly memorable. The opportunities that Temple Newsam provided would not be driven by selfish self-interest and the strife of classes, but general cooperation for the common good of all. The handover event appears to have been one of good humour and commitment to ensure that the house and estate would be maintained and treasured. There are, though, some questions which are difficult to answer from the existing sources and archives. What happened to the people who worked there or were tenants farming the estate? How did the new management deal with matters of employment? Overnight, the council now had responsibility for a new raft of employees in the difficult years of the 1920s. How would the estate develop to create recreational activities for the citizens of Leeds? Well, a special committee of the council was set up to deal with matters relating to Temple Newsam, the Temple Newsam Estate Committee. Alderman Charles Wilson in the chair. The committee set aside 238 acres for public recreation ground purposes, and for the employees, the committee meeting of the 27th of November approved the payment of wages and special accounts. A relief, I should think, for everybody there. An interesting picture in the possession of Temple Newsam's archives is this one of Edward Wood and a group of estate workers in September 1922. And Mr. Wood had compiled a list of employees in key positions with notes about their experience, and he was recommending them to their future employer. Mr. Philip Marsden, just look, on the left of Mr. Wood, Mr. Philip Marsden, already the agent, was appointed for a further 2 years in the first instance at a salary of £200. In fact, he continued as agent until retiring in 1935, nearly 48 years after nearly 48 years association with Temple Newsam. He lived at the Grange, still there on Selby Road, just along from the church. One local newspaper reported on his retirement in 1935, when Mrs. Maynell Ingram appointed him to Temple Newsam, she said to him, "Make the estate go," and he'd been trying ever since. So some of the characters here on the left, that's the wrong one. Just on the extreme left is Frank Daniels, the farm bailiff. His role to oversee all aspects of the home farm, providing the house and estate with everyday requirements, dairy, beef produce, gardens for vegetables, etc. Mr. Wood's note about Frank Daniels is thoroughly experienced in all branches of farming, milking, stock, etc. Age 64, married, no children at home. The next one on the second one is Henry Tinker, age 63. He was a foreman bricklayer. Again, a very complimentary summary of his capabilities. It was used to all kinds of repairs inside and outside on farms and cottages, etc. Has done all repairs in the mansion for many years, aged 63, married, 40 years on the estate. J.E. or Jack Butler, the estate foreman, joiner and house carpenter. I think we moved across to the right-hand side of the picture. Thoroughly conversant with heating apparatus, water and drains connected with the mansion. I would imagine in such a large house that would be absolutely essential, the water and the drains, if not at least the heating apparatus. 26 years on the estate, married, no children at home, lives in North Lodge rent-free, light and cold. The last figure in the photo is Thomas Farndale, who was another man employed on the estate and had been there since 1888. Such long service to the family suggests that there was a strong bond between the employees and their employer, between place and people. As Mr. Farrer had said in his speech to the tenants at the wedding celebrations for Edward and Lady Dorothy in 1909, he hoped their bond was not only one of community of interest, but the more lasting one of real affection and real friendship. Friendship which enabled them to regard each other as members of one family, who would share each other's sorrows if need be, and share each other's happiness and pleasures. There were several other employees in Edward Wool's list of recommendations: the head gardener, woodmen, farm labourers, horsemen, good all-round men who could turn their hands to other tasks on the farm and the estate. But I have not yet come across very much information about whether or for how long these people continued in employment after the corporation took over. I know that some here in our audience are really interested in capturing such information about estate workers, tenants and servants, and there has been some research in the past and exhibitions done at Temple Newsam. But perhaps that's something that they might be encouraged to pick up on in the future. The idea that this new acquisition might provide employment was something that Alderman Wilson had referred to in his speech on the 19th of September. This would be especially important in the economic conditions of the 1920s. He proposed an archaeological dig, excavating the site of the old Temple Newsam, that was in a field just east of Thorpe Hall, nearer to the River Aire. To quote one newspaper report of Alderman Wilson's words, "If the foundations could be laid bare, pilgrims would flock there from all parts of the world," a ground claim but regrettably not achieved. The fountain to the south ought to be stocked with fish and so give delight to children visiting the grounds, though it would be necessary to reduce the depth of the water somewhat. Further, he would like to see the park stocked with one of the best herds of British Frisian cattle in the country. Noble-looking animals, their milk would supply the local hospitals. All very practical ideas for benefiting the local community and providing employment. Another plan was for a full golf course, thus providing labour again for the unemployed, as well as creating a major recreational asset for the city. An 18-hole municipal golf course was estimated to cost £3,000. A renowned international golf course architect, Dr. Alistair Mackenzie, was employed, and such was the success and the number of people playing golf that a second course was commissioned and opened in 1925. Dr. Mackenzie, once again, the architect. These were the Lord Irwin, the number 1 course, and the Lady Dorothy, number 2 course. The history and the importance of the golf courses is yet another topic for future exploration. One surprising addition after the 1922 handover was the creation of a jungle, or a zoo, in the area of the kitchen garden, the rose garden. Now this was short-lived and it lasted for about a year. There was an auction of the denizens, this is the newspaper term, the denizens of the jungle and fir farm at Temple Newsam, and it was so novel as to be exciting attention from individuals and show people from far outside Leeds. These denizens included monkeys, deer, kangaroos, golden and silver pheasants, and other rare birds, as well as a remarkable collection of valuable rabbits. Some of the stock came from Monk Preston Park, where the late Reverend Benjamin Edward had an aviary that was known far and wide. A veterinary surgeon who had examined the animals and birds reported that they were all in first-class condition. The baboon is described as just like a man and knows what is said to him as if he were a human. These worthy plans for recreational activities necessarily required improved transport, and in January 1923 the committee began applications to extend the tramway to a terminus at the junction of the Sycamore Walk with the Abbey Walk in Temple Newsam Park, and a new road was planned between Temple Newsam Estate and Holton Mill Road. The journalist Sidney Walton used a phrase by John Ruskin, the golden stain of time, to describe the imprints of history on Temple Newsam. He returned to the harvest metaphor to end his newspaper report. So, into the golden fields of the past does Leeds, the harvester, enter this day. The gates of entrance into a spacious estate and splendid inheritance of Temple Newsam stand open to every citizen of Leeds. To the boundaries of the city, Leeds has added the fair and mystical empire of the buried centuries. It is a day of harvest song. The service and speeches marking the change of ownership of Temple Newsam in 1922 have been my topic this evening. The house, the city and the church, all three brought together on that September day 100 years ago. Tributes and deeply felt sentiments have been covered by all the speakers, but all agreed that Temple Newsam would create many benefits for the people of Leeds. Health and welfare, education, keeping in touch with and learning from its history, and spiritual and mental development. Many facilities were envisaged, and certainly these were noble ventures for public enjoyment. Indeed, on the day that the mansion reopened in October 1923, there were 20,000 visitors to the house and a fireworks display in the evening. In the first 10 years, it received 1 million visitors. A brochure for a conference held at the mansion in 1924 provides a fitting summary. Everything possible is being done by the provision of travel facilities, refreshment rooms, etc., to make Temple Newsam a convenient and popular showplace, and it is hoped that the citizens of Leeds will realise and appreciate the value and beauty of their new acquisition. Temple Newsam, the home of many notable men and women, the birthplace of a king, is now the property of the people of Leeds in perpetuity. It is a trust as well as an inheritance. Thank you.
Dorothy, we are in your debt. We really are in your debt. That was a wonderful journey through, reached back beyond 1922, but the focus was clearly 1922, brought it to the forefront of our minds. Well, it did me anyway. We are really in your debt, so thank you. What we would like to do is, has anyone got any questions they would like to ask, or observations, or those sorts of things? I wonder, actually, just rather than do that now, just have two minutes, just turn to the person next to you perhaps, just share a thought or two, what you've heard, and then we'll come back and see if there are any thoughts. There could be questions, certainly for Dorothy, although she's quite reluctant because she sort of says, but there could be observations as well. So just have a couple of minutes talking to your neighbour perhaps, even if it's someone you don't know, that could be good. And then we'll come back and just see if we get any questions and comments after that. any questions or comments? Just put your hand up, we can bring a microphone to you. Yes, yeah.
Thanks, Dorothy, for a very interesting talk. There was a picture of the estate workers in that large group. I was trying to recognise the background to that photo. Do you know what it was taken?
I don't, unless well, I really don't, because it's so hazy. It's a scan of a photo that's a copy of it, so further investigation.
Good. It doesn't come to mind where exactly that might be. No. Okay.
Can't help on that one at the moment.
Anyone else? Yep. Just go around with the mic so we can hear that. We can't hear Dorothy's reply.
Thank you, Dorothy. It's probably said in the literature that's been published in more present time, but do you know whether there was research made for much of the property, paintings and other items that were auctioned off?
I think following 1923, Leeds City Council have had a programme over quite a period of years to buy things back that were associated with the house. But at the same time, particularly during the Second World War, it became a repository for the museum and art gallery's possessions. So a lot of paintings and decorative arts arrived at Temple Newsam, and I think many of them are still housed there. There's tons of stuff. But there's, I think, I understand this continuous process of buying things back as they arrive. There was a kernel of stuff that was, I think, left there, and things that were placed in other Leeds City museums that have been bought back. But in terms of a consistent, I think they've just got so much stuff to work their way through.
Thank you. Is there anywhere on the record when Temple Newsam was sold to the council of the covenants under which it was bought, so we know what the council can do and can't do
Yes.
with the property?
In the house and in the West Yorkshire Archives, in the archives and at the house, there are copies of the deed of conveyance, which is one of my pictures, but it had to go in everything else. There's a copy of the deed of conveyance, and it sets down the covenants, one of which is the annual church service, another is to maintain the house and preserve it as a historic place, another is to maintain the parkland and the roads, and I can never remember what the fourth one is, but it's something along those lines of preserving the integrity of the estate, which raises questions, as some of us know, but that is in the covenant, is the integrity of the estate.
And that's at Temple Newsam House?
It's in the West Yorkshire Archives, it's a copy of Temple Newsam House.
West Yorkshire Archives, where's that?
It's at Morley. The Leeds branch is at Morley. But if you're really interested, somewhere I've got a photo. I can, if you leave your details, I can forward you to.
Oh, please, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for what you said. I mean, it's been fascinating. But I wanted to ask you, I mean, one thing, I mean, are you a local historian or history teacher? What's your background? And the other thing is, you mentioned when you were telling us all about this, that the cells were there from Harewood House. So does that mean that some of the stuff from Temple Newsam is actually at Harewood House?
I'll take the last one first. I don't know who purchased what. The Lassells were looking round and having a nosy, basically. Princess Mary and so on. So I don't know who purchased what. And perhaps somewhere in the records of the auctioneers whose name escapes me, they might have logged down who bought what, but that's a long shot. To go back to your first question, without giving too much away, my academic background includes history, including a career in teaching at Parkley alongside other things. And I started more years ago than I care to remember, on my own family history, which has taken me 50 years to complete. And COVID and retirement has aided that process. So when Matthew said You could do this. Yeah. So I've given it a shot, really, but it's certainly been quite a voyage of exploration. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Just one more and then...
Dorothy, when I was at Holden Temple Newsam School, there were 4 usual school houses that we had. There was Dunstan, De Lacy, Ingram and Halifax. Now, we know about Ingram and Halifax. Anything on the De Lacy and Dunstan? I never found out who they were, where they came from, or what connection they have with Temple Newsam.
I'll have to put a question mark on Dunstan because I'm not too sure, but De Lacy is...
Is that Elbert De Lacy?
it's the De Lacy folks, family, who were given estates in Yorkshire after the Norman Conquest. So, not quite sure, can't remember which branch, but the De Lacys go back to post-Norman Conquest times. Dunstans, come back to you on that.
Thank you. Lord Halifax, would you like to please have a word?
Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to say one or two things, because the acquisition of Temple Newsam is something which I've been involved with, not the acquisition itself, but one of the conditions, which is coming to the annual Eucharist in the house. It wasn't 2 or 3 years, I think it took place at Whitkirk, in the course of restoration of the long gallery. But I've been coming for nearly 60 years. I think my father considered I was quite a useful chauffeur for him. I rather enjoyed driving, so that was the excuse. I would just like to put it in context. When Mrs. Menor Ingram, and many of you may have read the book about Mrs. Menor Ingram, she really behaved rather badly, I think, because she married Hugo Menor. And my family, the Woods, had, well, Hickleton in, it's now South Yorkshire, but it was the West Riding, and Garraby was given to my grandparents, Edward and Dorothy, in 1909, as a wedding present, equipped, not quite sure it's the right word to use, with a staff of 12, not a bad wedding present. So they had 2 houses in Yorkshire anyway. And then when Mrs. Menor Ingram, Emily, died, she really behaved quite badly, I think, because she left it to her family. And I mean, standing here today, if the Menors were in the room, I think they wouldn't have been very pleased about that. It wouldn't be really considered the right way to do things. So I'd just like to put that in. The other thing which always amuses me about Temple Newsam, my grandmother, Dorothy, she'd been brought up, she was a daughter of the Lord Onslow of the day. She'd been brought up in a large house, Clandon, in Surrey, which caught fire a few years ago, but it was a large house. She then married my grandfather and, as I've just said, got Garraby as a wedding present, and then Hickleton, and then Temple Newsam. She then went as Viceroy to India, where she lived in Viceroy's Lodge in 1926 with a staff of no less than 800. And then ended up going to Washington, and if anybody's been to Washington and seen the ambassador's house there, that wasn't small either. And I went to see her shortly before she died, when she had decided to end her days at a little village called Bugford. And my father had just built a pair of bungalows for pensioners. And my grandmother sort of said, "Do you think I could have one of the bungalows?" And I went down for one evening, and I got talking about Temple Newsam, and I said, "You must tell me, it must have been wonderful living at Temple Newsam, wasn't it?" "Wonderful," she said. "Coldest house I think I've ever been in." And I said, but you must have had wonderful dinners and banquets and it must have been absolutely tremendous to live in a great house like that. She said it wasn't really very comfortable. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, there was a permanent staff, and then when we went to Temple Newsam, we used to get about 50 people in from Leeds. And so I was sort of getting rather confused by all this. But she said, you know, they had a lot to do. There were all the gas lamps to be lit and carried around the house. There were the hip baths to be filled, carried around the house. She said everybody was extremely busy, but it didn't make for a comfortable house. And she said, and I'm in my bungalow, 3 bedrooms, a lady who comes and looks after me 2 hours a day. She said, I can switch on the light, I can turn the tap and get hot water. I've even got a television. I've got a telephone. And she said, a far cry from Temple Newsam. Anyway, I just wanted to share that experience. One other thing I would say is that the relationship, which was obviously very good between my grandfather and the City of Leeds in 1922, but I think that's continued. And Dorothy commented on it. Over the years, especially in the late 40s, I think it was in 49, and continued by my father, and I hope by me, and I hope by my son, James, there has been a gradual sort of repatriation to Temple Newsam of all the things which were either sowed in that amazing 7-day sale. It was amazing because there's anything left. But there is, and there's still what we call the Temple Newsam wish list. And it's items which we are still in the possession of my family, and which are going to come back to Temple Newsam one day. But over the years, every curator has made a really fantastic effort to repatriate. Some have been purchases, some have been gifts, but they've found things which have been sold at the other side of America, and have brought them back. So the city have done the most incredible job of repatriation of pictures and furniture for the house. And I think it's pretty unique. I don't think that's probably happened elsewhere in this country. Anyway, I just wanted to share a few thoughts, but to say thank you very much, Dorothy, because I've learned a lot.
I think we'll draw this bit to a close. Our thanks to Lord Halifax. It's lovely to have him here and to have that sense of continuity with the story that we've been hearing tonight. And also, again, our thanks to Dorothy. What a wonderful speech and a sense of it being alive for us now, 100 years on, that she's done. So thank you again.